Let's be clear, it's not alleged breached. They breached. Unequivocally, undoubtedly, undeniably, irrefutably. It's a farce. They have very clever lawyers that have managed to game the system. It's a terrible situation for the Premier League. It's embarrassing, but I don't think it reflects particularly well on Leicester as a football club.
Leicester have avoided a points deduction this season after winning their appeal for an alleged breach of Premier League profit and sustainability rules. Leicester were charged in March this year for breaching spending rules for the 3-year period ending June 2023. So it covered 3 seasons. 19-20 combined with 2021, 21-22 and 22-23. But this is key. Leicester argued, and successfully argued, that the charge could not be applied as they had already been relegated when the accounts were completed in June 2023. So in other words, Leicester were saved by their own relegation and the timing of their account submission.
Let's be clear, it's not alleged breached. They breached. Unequivocally, undoubtedly, undeniably, irrefutably. What they've managed to do is find a Bermuda Triangle and find themselves in it where the governance doesn't capture them. So they are beyond governance now. So the financial fair, whoever drafted those rules was probably walking around the Premier League office now holding his head in his hands because you've allowed Leicester to get out from underneath, to be in no one's jurisdiction. They were not in the jurisdiction of the EFL when they were in the EFL. So they pulled that stroke last year by saying that we didn't have to provide our financial accounts to the EFL because we weren't in the EFL in March. They've now pulled another stroke, which is that they handed in their, when you get relegated, you hand over your league share to the upcoming team. And they've done that on June the 23rd, which means they weren't in the jurisdiction of the Premier League in June 30 when their accounts are being filed. It's a farce. It's a farce. It's great for other people that are going to come down the track and find a way around potential challenges. But this is not an alleged breach. They breached. And they
but in Leicester's defence,
Jim,
they say
they breached.
They identified flaws in the drafting of the Premier League's rules. It's the Premier League, Simon, who've been left with egg in their face.
That's fine, but let's get the language right. They breached. What they got out from underneath is jurisdiction. They were not under anyone's jurisdiction under a technicality. They have very clever lawyers that have managed to game the system and achieve an outcome that makes it an unequal landscape. I don't agree anymore with the principles of what PSR is trying to achieve, because I'd like someone to define to me what sustainability looks like. Because if sustainability looks like a billionaire owner that commits 100 million worth of funding to a football club for the next 10 years, that's sustainability. So when we argue about sustainability, none of these clowns can tell you what sustainability means. But under the governance of the current regime, Leicester have gamed the system. They've copped a snook at it. They've bucked the system. They're under no one's jurisdiction. They've dropped into the EFL. They had no governance in the EFL, so they could do precisely what they wanted to do in the EFL. They didn't have to submit their accounts. They could do what they wanted. They didn't have to meet any financial obligations.
But that's a flaw in the system. It's not their fault, is it?
But that doesn't alter the parameters of what I'm saying. It may well be a flaw in the system. It's not to be admired. It's not to be looked at and said, from the Premier League point of view, it's embarrassing that they've allowed this loophole.
I was going to say, you got to point your guns at them, Simon, and not Leicester.
I'm not pointing my guns at Leicester. I'm pointing my guns at the observations that you're characterising it as an alleged breach. They breached. They got out from a technicality. That's what they got out from. Not because their finances didn't. If you govern them, if you're under the auspices of the Premier League, you should be up to the end of June 30th. They've missed it. They've got out. So basically, the moral of the story is: get yourself relegated. Cover up all your financials in terms of the reality of what you're supposed to do that everyone else has to do. Find a clever lawyer and get around it. They'll have to redraft and understand the principles, because it's never happened before that a club that goes up or goes down has been caught in this. It's in a Bermuda Triangle. There is no governance. When you're in the EFL, you have to submit your accounts or your projections for the ensuing year by March. And then what they do is say, hang on a second, you're going to potentially breach. You're going to have to sell players. Leicester didn't want to do that. So they didn't submit their accounts because they weren't in the EFL in March. They get relegated in May. They don't hand in. They hand their notices on June the 23rd. So the accounts run up to June the 30th. So they're not in the Premier League's jurisdiction. It's a terrible situation for the Premier League. It's embarrassing, but I don't think it reflects particularly well on Leicester as a football club. I think it reflects really well on their lawyers.
What do you want them to do? If there's a window, you go through the window.
But that's fine, Danny.
The same up and down the country every day in the courts. If somebody guilty, but they find a way out because there's a technicality or a loophole in the law. They do.
Exactly.
Fine.
Admire it.
I'm not admiring it. I'm saying, but you can't expect them not to go through the window when it's open.
Why was the Premier League's lawyer not more clever than Leicester's
It's
lawyer?
nothing to do with the Premier League law. It's to do with the drafting of the rules.
Well, whoever drafted the rules.
The rules were drafted in such a way that they have done a brilliant job, a world-class job from a legal representation point of view. It does not mean that Leicester City Football Club were not guilty of the things that they were charged.
No, but the question is this. If you found a window and you were in charge at Palace and the mistakes had happened, which I know you said he wouldn't on your watch, but if they would, and then one of your lawyers said there's a window here, you're going through it.
Yes, and I would suggest that if someone said to me that that was an opportunity that you took, which was based upon other people's failings, I would say yes. I don't think I admired O.J. Simpson for getting off for murder, did I? On the basis of a technicality. No. Notwithstanding it, I look at this and I say it's a poor indictment of how unprofessional these things are at times, because Leicester were bang to rights.
Well, is it not going to be a good thing?
Bang to rights.
Is it not going to be a good thing in terms of a revamp of the laws, maybe?
Well, a redrafting. All that will happen is they'll redraft it and go, that ain't happening again. We don't care. When you're in a division or when you're not in a division, you will be caught. If you join a division at a certain time, they'll just widen the windows of when you've got to produce your accounts or widen the scope. If Leicester had handed over their league share on June the 30th or July the 1st, toast. But they didn't, under a technicality of when a team gets promoted and when you hand over the league share. They handed it over June the 23rd. That wasn't orchestrated by them. It's brilliant legal work, because they've gone, hang on a second, you left the league on June the 23rd and your accounts went up to June the 30th and you're judged by accounts that went up to June the 30th. So if you paired that back and said, out the 7 days between June the 23rd and June the 30th, would they have made a material difference to your financial accounts? No, they'd have probably made them worse. But because of a technicality which says you weren't in the league on June the 30th, you left on June the 23rd and joined an EFL, and you weren't under their governance either, you were under no one's governance. So Leicester could do what they wanted.
So while this appeal was being fought, Simon, and Leicester have ultimately won it,
yes,
did the Premier League know what was coming? Was there conversations within the Premier League, this Leicester thing, we're not going to win that?
Well, I would imagine not.
We're not going to win that.
I would imagine
the timing's going to do for us.
I would imagine that what you've got is the tragedy of the interest is we get people like Stefan Borson in the room that are interesting to us because they're poring over rules. And we now get lawyers that are determining league tables and outcomes to provide the intrigue in football. That's the tragedy of where we've landed at. Football is about emotion and about sport and about integrity and about what happens on the pitch. It's now become bookkeepers that are most of the time dull and boring that you wouldn't want to spend any time with, trotting over rules to give you some form of intrigue. That's a tragedy of where we've lurched towards, and this is what the Premier League's got to work out where it wants to go.
However, as far as Leicester are concerned, though, I'm not so keen to hit them over the head with a rubber cosh. They got punished because they were relegated. It was down to them to get themselves back up to the Premier League, which they have done. So, but Leicester, good morning and well done on all accounts.
I don't admire it. I admire the legal work. If you breach the governance of rules, and you under every other 91 of the football clubs in English football are under this governance, except Leicester. Leicester can break the financial rules in the Premier League, and because of jurisdiction, they can get away with it. They can land in the EFL, and because of jurisdiction and time, they can get away with it. And I don't like it. I don't like it. It's gaming the system. I understand it, and I respect the legal acumen that's achieved.
So what kind of Premier League have we got?
Well, a Premier League that's been caught out, but there's always redrafting of legislation. There's always redrafting of rules, because ultimately, somewhere along the line, some clever-ass lawyer will find his way around it.
And will some clever-ass lawyer representing Manchester City do similarly?
Possibly, because they already have done that for the last 3 or 4 years. So there's no doubt this will happen. This is the worry for the Premier League. The fact that we sit in a room looking across a table at an accountant and think that's interesting, and the fact that we look at the legal landscape, this is what we'll do for the Premier League. When we look at the leagues around the world, like the Serie A's, like the leaguers that are in our wake, and we say, what's going to ever stop the Premier League? What's going to stop the progress of the Premier League? This kind of stuff, this kind of asphyxiation, this kind of change of direction to go, we're fixing problems. What problems are you fixing by introducing these rules? Well, we're providing sustainability, but no one's gone bust in the Premier League. The Premier League's an unprecedented roar in success. I know, let's tie ourselves up in knots. This is what we'll do for the Premier League's development in the longer game.
You see, look at what's coming in now, Simon. Jim, please ask Simon the question. Is there now a chance that City's lawyers will find something similar and that they'll walk scot-free?
They don't need to, do they?
As Andy in the Black Country.
Well, here's the thing. City have told us, in no uncertain terms, but they have unequivocal, irrefutable, undeniable, undebatable evidence which will shut down these spurious, outrageous accusations that have been made against them. The fact they've never produced anything along those lines might well tell you that they don't have that irrefutable, undeniable, unequivocal evidence, and they'll rely on the fact they've got very good lawyers.
Leicester have won their appeal. Now, have the Premier League been left with egg on their face here? We'll talk more about this when the man we mentioned before, FFP expert Stefan Borsten, joins us in about an hour from now. But Leicester have avoided any points deduction. Stay with us.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.